I stood frozen in the back of the church, clutching my bridesmaid bouquet, watching my wedding dress move down the aisle on someone else's body. 3 weeks ago, she'd been my maid of honor. Now Sarah was marrying the man who'd proposed to me last Christmas. The white invitation with my name hastily crossed out still sat on my nightstand at home. When I finally confronted her in the bridal suite, she simply adjusted her veil and whispered, "He deserves someone better than you," her eyes never leaving her reflection. I stood frozen in the back of the church, clutching my bridesmaid bouquet, watching my wedding dress move down the aisle on someone else's body. 3 weeks ago, she'd been my maid of honor. Now Sarah was marrying the man who'd proposed to me last Christmas. The white invitation with my name hastily crossed out still sat on my nightstand at home. When I finally confronted her in the bridal suite, she simply adjusted her veil and whispered, "He deserves someone better than you," her eyes never leaving her reflection. The memory loops in my mind as I stand rigidly in the last row of bridesmaids, demoted from bride to participant in my own replacement. My champagne-colored dress, hastily purchased when Sarah informed me it would be healing to participate in their ceremony, feels like a costume in some elaborate psychological torture. This nightmare began 6 weeks ago when I'd stopped by our wedding planner's office to finalize centerpiece selections. Marissa's puzzled expression should have been my first warning. "Catherine?" I thought Sarah was handling the final arrangements. She shuffled through papers on her desk. "She's been making all the decisions lately, with David. Sarah's helping, of course, but I should be involved in the final selections," I'd replied, still oblivious to what was happening. Marissa hesitated, then turned her computer monitor toward me. "Maybe you should look at this." The wedding planning document displayed contained all our carefully selected details: the venue we'd booked a year in advance, the string quartet I'd hired, the menu David and I had taste tested together. But the names on the contract had been changed. Where Catherine Mitchell and David Cooper once appeared, Sarah Winters and David Cooper now stood in freshly updated text. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Sarah submitted these changes 3 weeks ago," Marissa said quietly. "She said you'd stepped aside. That you and David had ended things and she was now the bride." David confirmed it when they came in together last week. The room seemed to tilt slightly, but I maintained my composure, years of corporate crisis management kicking in automatically. I thanked Marissa for her time, requested copies of the altered documents, and walked calmly to my car before allowing the first tear to fall. Rather than calling either of them immediately, I drove to our apartment, mine and David's, where we'd lived together for the past 3 years. The key still worked. Inside, subtle changes registered immediately. Sarah's cardigan draped over the couch. Unfamiliar toiletries in our bathroom. A suitcase with my clothes neatly packed, sitting by the door. I was methodically photographing these details when David returned home, his step faltering when he saw me standing in our living room. "Kate," he began, my nickname suddenly sounding foreign on his lips. "You're supposed to be at yoga." "Apparently, I'm supposed to be a lot of places I'm not," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Like living in this apartment. Or getting married at the plaza next month." His face shifted through expressions: surprise, guilt, then a calculated determination. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I agreed. "Perhaps you can start by explaining why our wedding now belongs to my maid of honor." The conversation that followed contained all the predictable elements. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They'd tried to fight their feelings. They hadn't wanted to hurt me. David claimed they'd planned to tell me properly, but the wedding arrangements had complicated things. The deposits were non-refundable, he explained, as if this justified the complete theft of my wedding. It seemed wasteful to cancel everything when the feelings between Sarah and me are real. Real enough to warrant stealing my wedding day? My dress? My life? I asked, still maintaining a control that clearly unsettled him. "That's overdramatic, Kate. Nothing was stolen. Things simply evolved." I looked at the man I'd loved for 6 years, noticing how easily he dismissed the theft of not just material wedding elements, but the future we'd planned together. The betrayal was comprehensive. My fiancé and my best friend since college, the maid of honor I'd chosen to stand beside me on what should have been the happiest day of my life. I need to collect my things, I said finally, the strategic part of my mind already calculating next steps while the emotional part remained carefully contained. Sarah boxed most of it up, he replied, gesturing to several containers stacked neatly in the corner. She thought it would be easier this way. Of course she had. Sarah had always been efficient, a quality I'd once admired in my friend and business partner. Now I recognized it as something colder, calculated opportunism that had apparently been directed at my life. I insisted on checking the boxes myself, discovering several important items mysteriously absent: family jewelry, financial documents, the backup drive containing client projects for our jointly owned graphic design business. When questioned, David claimed ignorance, suggesting I was confused about what belonged to whom. After 6 years of shared life, rather than arguing, I documented the missing items on my phone, then coolly asked about the engagement ring. The antique emerald that had belonged to my grandmother, reset for our engagement. Sarah's having it adjusted to fit her finger, David replied, confirming the final theft I'd suspected but hadn't yet confirmed. It suits her coloring better anyway. The calculated cruelty of the statement might have broken me had I allowed emotion to lead my response. Instead, I nodded as if receiving routine information, continuing my inventory while planning my next moves. I left with only essential documents and irreplaceable personal items, ignoring David's attempts at appeasing explanations. In the parking lot, I spotted Sarah's car arriving, the confrontation clearly planned for when both of them could present a united front. I drove away before she could enter the building, denying them the dramatic scene they'd likely rehearsed. The final confrontation occurred 3 days later in the bridal shop where my custom gown waited for final alterations. Alterations now being made for Sarah's slightly taller frame. I'd gone to collect the veil I'd purchased separately, only to find her there for a fitting, wearing my dress, flanked by 2 bridesmaids who couldn't meet my eyes. When she spotted me, Sarah didn't show shame or guilt, but something closer to irritation at the interruption. She dismissed the attendants with a wave, then turned to me with the practiced sympathy she'd perfected through years of navigating social complexities. "Catherine, you shouldn't be here. This is only making things harder for everyone." "By everyone, you mean yourself," I observed, maintaining the same calm I'd cultivated since discovering their betrayal. "Since you're wearing my dress, marrying my fiancé, and using my wedding arrangements." "They were never really yours," she replied, turning back to the mirror. "Not really. David and I have a connection that you and he never did. You must have sensed it." When I didn't respond with the emotional outburst she clearly expected, Sarah grew defensive, her carefully maintained composure slipping. "He was settling for you, Catherine. Everyone could see it. I'm just helping things work out as they should have from the beginning." Then came the words that would echo in my mind as I stood watching her walk down the aisle in my place. "He deserves someone better than you." Now, as the ceremony proceeds, I observe details rather than surrendering to emotion. How the centerpieces match exactly what I had selected. How the string quartet plays the processional I had chosen. How Sarah wears not just my wedding concept but my grandmother's emerald ring, visible as David places the wedding band beside it. When the reception begins, I slip away without confronting either of them again. In my hotel room, I change out of the bridesmaid dress, placing it carefully in a garment bag as evidence rather than discarding it in emotional rejection. I open my laptop and begin a methodical documentation of everything I've observed and experienced. The wedding Sarah stole from me cost $87,000, with non-refundable deposits of $32,000 paid entirely from my savings account. Our graphic design business, built primarily through my client relationships, represents another significant asset now at risk. The engagement ring, My grandmother's emerald reset at my expense is valued at approximately $15,000 beyond its sentimental worth. I create folders for each category of loss, attaching relevant documentation, photos, receipts, contracts, communications. Not in preparation for an emotional confrontation, but for the strategic response now forming in my mind. They believe they've orchestrated the perfect transition, my life neatly transferred to Sarah while I'm expected to fade quietly into the background, the discarded friend and fiancé too devastated to challenge their narrative. They have fundamentally misjudged who they're dealing with. By midnight, I've created the initial framework for what comes next. Not revenge driven by emotional pain, but a strategically implemented consequence appropriate to their actions. David and Sarah have stolen more than a wedding. They've taken my trust, my future plans, my financial investments, and my business stability. They believe the theft is complete. They will soon discover how wrong they are. The week following the wedding passes in a carefully structured rhythm of assessment and documentation. I've taken a personal wellness break from client interactions at our design firm, a plausible excuse that raises no immediate suspicions while giving me crucial time to evaluate my position. Temporary residence. A hotel suite paid from my personal savings becomes command central for this methodical examination. Each aspect of the situation requires separate analysis: financial entanglements, business implications, legal considerations, and social repercussions. The financial assessment produces the most immediately actionable information. I review 6 years of account statements, credit card records, and investment transactions, creating a comprehensive map of my financial relationship with David. The results confirm what I suspected. My contributions significantly outweighed his across every category. The wedding expenses tell the clearest story. Of the $87,000 total budget, my personal savings funded $72,000, including all deposits now being enjoyed by Sarah and David. The remaining $15,000 came from a joint account technically shared, but primarily funded through my larger salary deposits. Not a single wedding vendor was paid with David's independent funds. I document each transaction meticulously, creating spreadsheets with dates, amounts, account origins, and vendor details. Not for emotional vindication, but as essential evidence for what comes next. The business evaluation reveals an even more concerning picture. Our graphic design firm, Horizon Creative, was technically established as an equal partnership 5 years ago. Yet the client acquisition records tell a different story. 78% of our current clients came through my professional network or direct pitching. The company's portfolio, which David and Sarah now control in my absence, was built predominantly through my creative direction and relationship management. Most concerning is the discovery that 3 significant client payments, totaling $34,000, were deposited last week but don't appear in the business operating account. A carefully worded email to our accountant confirms my suspicion. David initiated a transfer to a new account 2 days after the wedding, an account bearing only his and Sarah's names. The legal landscape requires professional evaluation. I schedule a consultation with Eleanor Winters, a family law attorney specializing in complex financial disentanglements. Her office, deliberately chosen across town from our usual professional circles, provides the privacy this assessment requires. This situation contains multiple legal dimensions, Eleanor observes, reviewing the documentation I've provided. The personal property claims, business partnership complications, and potential fraud concerns each require specific approaches. I'm most concerned about immediate protection of remaining assets, I explain, before they can be similarly redirected. Eleanor nods approvingly at my pragmatic focus. We'll start with emergency protective measures for the business assets, then address the personal property claims. The engagement ring presents a particularly interesting case, as it contains both inherited property and new investment components. I leave her office with a clear action list: financial protection measures, business ownership documentation, and preparation of formal demands for property return or compensation. Each step calculated rather than emotionally reactive, the social assessment proves more nuanced. I create a relationship map identifying key figures in our overlapping social circles, categorizing each based on loyalty patterns and information access. The results reveal a carefully orchestrated narrative already in motion. Sarah and David have apparently been laying groundwork for months, subtly repositioning me in our social circle as increasingly career-focused and emotionally unavailable, while highlighting their own unexpected but genuine connection. Friends report variations of the same story, that I had grown distant, that David and I were naturally drifting apart, that Sarah had, reluctantly, developed feelings she couldn't deny. The consistent messaging suggests coordinated effort rather than spontaneous explanation. Text messages from mutual friends reveal Sarah has been actively discouraging people from contacting me directly, offering to check on Catherine herself and report back. The isolation strategy is as calculated as the financial maneuvers. Most revealing is what I discover about the wedding timeline. Despite their claims of a sudden realization of feelings, vendor communications show Sarah began making inquiries about assuming the wedding arrangements nearly 3 months before the supposed revelation to me. The photographer's emails contain particularly damning evidence, discussion of replacing me in the wedding photos dating back 14 weeks. This wasn't impulsive passion. It was methodical replacement. As I document each discovery, a pattern emerges more clearly. Sarah hasn't simply pursued my fiancé, she has systematically appropriated my life, relationship, wedding, business role, social position. The comprehensive nature of this replacement strategy suggests something beyond romantic opportunism. This was calculated identity acquisition. My mother calls on the 5th day, her concern evident despite my carefully neutral updates since the wedding. "Catherine, sweetheart, how are you really doing?" she asks, mother's intuition detecting the controlled quality of my responses. "I'm being methodical, Mom," I reply honestly, processing everything before taking action. "That sounds like my daughter," she says, her tone mixing concern with pride. "But remember, you're allowed to feel this, not just analyze it." I'm allowing both, I assure her. The analysis just happens to be more immediately useful. We talk for nearly an hour, her support unconditional, but not enabling emotional wallowing. When I explain my systematic approach to the situation, she offers practical assistance rather than pushing for emotional processing I'm not ready to prioritize. "Your father and I can help with temporary living expenses if needed," she says. "And that investment portfolio we established when you graduated, it's still untouched if you need capital for legal proceedings." Her practical support reinforces my strategic approach. This isn't about emotional recovery yet, it's about appropriate response to calculated harm. By the end of the week, I've completed comprehensive assessment of my position across all relevant dimensions. The evidence folders contain irrefutable documentation of financial contributions, business development records, communications proving premeditation, and property ownership verification. Each category supports the same conclusion. I've been systematically defrauded by 2 people who anticipated emotional collapse rather than strategic response. The final element of my assessment emerges unexpectedly through social media monitoring. Sarah has posted wedding photos, my wedding, recast with her as bride, with a caption that confirms my understanding of their narrative strategy. Sometimes the path to true happiness isn't what we expect. Though our journey together faced unexpected challenges and difficult conversations with those who couldn't understand our connection, David and I have found our way to where we were always meant to be. #destined love, #new beginnings. The calculated repositioning is unmistakable, transforming their betrayal into a destined love story requiring brave defiance of those who couldn't understand, meaning me. The comments reveal their narrative has been largely successful, with friends and family offering congratulations and celebrating their courage to follow their hearts. Rather than triggering emotional response, this confirmation strengthens my resolve. They believe they've successfully rewritten history while securing the financial and professional benefits of my investments. They anticipate my continued silence, interpreting it as defeated acceptance rather than strategic preparation. On the 8th day after the wedding, I receive a business email from Sarah, the first direct communication since the ceremony. Her message carries the confident tone of someone who believes they've successfully navigated a potentially uncomfortable transition. Catherine, I hope you're taking the personal time you need. When you're ready to discuss your continued role at Horizon Creative, David and I have some thoughts about restructuring that might better suit your current situation. We value your contributions and want to find an arrangement that works for everyone moving forward. The breathtaking presumptuousness of this message, suggesting they'll determine my role in the company I primarily built, provides the final confirmation I need. They believe their position is secure, that I'll accept whatever diminished place they offer to avoid confrontation. That evening, I complete my silent assessment with a comprehensive action plan organized into immediate, short-term, and long-term objectives. Each category contains specific measures designed not for emotional retribution, but for appropriate consequence and recovery of what rightfully belongs to me. As I review the completed plan, I recognize the leverage points previously obscured by the shock of betrayal. In their confidence, Sarah and David have created vulnerabilities I'm now positioned to address with precision. They believed stealing my wedding was their final victory. In reality, it was merely their most visible mistake. On the 10th day after watching Sarah walk down the aisle in my place, I implement the first phase of my strategic response. The groundwork laid during my assessment period has revealed leverage points stronger than either Sarah or David have anticipated. The financial leverage emerges most immediately. My meeting with the bank reveals that while David removed his name from our joint personal account, he neglected to address the business operating account where my name remains primary. The overnight transfer I initiate, moving $42,000 to a secured business holding account, is completely legal given my partnership status, but will undoubtedly disrupt their post-honeymoon financial expectations. This protective measure ensures business funds remain available for operational expenses and client obligations. I explained to the banker, maintaining professional language rather than emotional justification. The recent unauthorized transfers necessitated this security protocol. His nod confirms the appropriateness of my action. The documentation I've provided, showing the previous irregular transfers initiated by David, supports the protective rather than punitive nature of this move. The wedding vendor leverage proves even more substantial than initially assessed. My careful review of contracts reveals that 18 of the 22 vendor agreements remain in my name despite Sarah's assumption of bride status. The payment records further strengthen my position. Vendors who received direct payment from my personal accounts have legal obligations to me regardless of who ultimately utilized their services. I begin systematic contact with each vendor, providing documentation of my financial contributions and requesting detailed accounting of services rendered. The conversations reveal a consistent pattern. Many vendors felt uncomfortable with the unusual situation, but proceeded based on David's assurances that everything was amicably arranged. We were told you had voluntarily stepped aside and wished them well, the florist explains, discomfort evident in her tone. David said you'd given your blessing for Sarah to assume the arrangements. That was not the case, I reply calmly. As my payment records indicate, I financed these arrangements in their entirety. The photographer proves particularly valuable as a leverage point. Melissa Hayes, who documented the ceremony and reception, contacts me directly after receiving my records request. I need to show you something, she says when we meet at a quiet cafe. I felt uncomfortable with this situation from the beginning, especially after finding these. She slides her tablet across the table, displaying email exchanges between Sarah and herself dating back nearly 4 months, long before any supposed revelation of feelings between Sarah and David. The messages discuss transition plans and replacement strategy with explicit acknowledgement of my ignorance. I considered contacting you directly when these came in, Melissa admits. But Sarah insisted you had grown distant from David and were relieved to step away from wedding pressure. She said informing you prematurely would only cause unnecessary pain. And you believed her? Melissa looks down. It seemed plausible given how she positioned it. She's very convincing. I photographed these exchanges with Melissa's permission, adding them to my growing evidence file. The timeline they establish contradicts every aspect of the unexpected feelings narrative Sarah and David have constructed. The business leverage emerges more comprehensively as I systematically contact clients. Rather than emotional explanations, I offer professional notification of structural reorganization at Horizon Creative, requesting that they confirm project requirements and payment procedures directly with me as we navigate internal transitions. The responses confirm what I've suspected. Most clients associate their projects primarily with me rather than David or the company generally. 3 major accounts explicitly request continuation of my personal oversight regardless of company structure changes. 2 more express concern about recent communication lapses since I stepped back, noting that David and Sarah don't seem fully familiar with project parameters. Most tellingly, our largest client, Reynolds Hospitality Group, representing 30% of annual revenue, responds with unexpected directness. Catherine, we contracted with Horizon specifically for your design approach. If you're establishing independent operations, please provide details. Our loyalty is to the creative talent, not the company structure. This single message fundamentally shifts the business leverage calculation. What David and Sarah view as their secured asset, the established company, holds significantly less value without the client relationships that remain personally connected to me. The professional network leverage extends beyond direct clients. Industry associates, initially cautious about taking sides in what appeared to be a personal matter, respond differently to my systematic documentation of business fund misappropriation and contract interference. This crosses professional boundaries, notes Javier, who heads the Regional Design Association where I've served on the leadership committee. Regardless of personal relationship changes, business ethics standards still apply. His response to my detailed chronology includes an unexpected leverage opportunity. Reynolds Hospitality Group is being considered for the association's annual design partnership, a prestigious project typically assigned to member firms. Javier's offer to recommend my independent consultation, bypassing Horizon entirely, represents significant professional leverage beyond existing client relationships. The social leverage develops more subtly, but with equal significance. My controlled, factual communications about the situation, provided only when directly asked rather than broadcast dramatically, create natural contrast to Sarah and David's elaborately constructed narrative. Friends report increasing discomfort with discrepancies they've noticed, particularly regarding timeline inconsistencies. Sarah told everyone you'd been growing apart for nearly a year, my former college roommate Rebecca reports during our lunch meeting. But I have texts from you from just 2 months ago talking about wedding excitement and your future with David. Things aren't adding up. I provide only factual clarification rather than emotional interpretation, allowing others to draw their own conclusions. This approach creates expanding ripples of doubt through our social circle without requiring my active management. The most unexpected leverage emerges through family connections. David's younger sister Megan contacts me directly, her message suggesting internal family dynamics I hadn't anticipated. Catherine, what they did was wrong. Mom and Dad are pretending to be supportive, but are actually horrified. Sarah's been pushing to access the family vacation property for their real honeymoon next month. I thought you should know they're using your joint savings for this trip while claiming financial hardship to my parents. This information reveals both additional financial misrepresentation and potential leverage within David's family structure, support I had assumed was unanimously aligned with the new couple. The physical property leverage includes items beyond the obvious wedding elements. My systematic inventory of personal possessions compared against what Sarah packed for me reveals significant discrepancies. The missing items include not just the family jewelry and financial documents I'd initially noted, but professional equipment, design prototypes for pending client projects, and intellectual property documentation for concepts developed independently before our business partnership. Most significantly, the engagement ring leverage proves stronger than anticipated. My consultation with a specialized jewelry attorney confirms what Eleanor suggested. The family emerald reset for my engagement represents a complex ownership case involving both inherited property rights and investment considerations. The stone itself remains legally classified as your inherited property, he explains, reviewing the documentation I've provided. The new setting, while purchased by David, was explicitly acquired for modification of your existing property, creating inseparable improvement rather than independent gift. This legal distinction provides clear grounds for reclamation rather than merely financial compensation. A leverage point that strikes at both financial and emotional aspects of Sarah's calculated appropriation. By the end of my 2-week assessment and preparation period, I've identified and documented leverage points across every dimension of the situation. The comprehensive picture reveals something neither Sarah nor David appears to have considered. In systematically appropriating my life, they've created an intricate web of legal, financial, and professional vulnerabilities. Their assumption that I would respond emotionally rather than strategically has led them to overlook these exposures. Their confidence in narrative control has blinded them to evidence trails that contradict their carefully constructed explanations. Their focus on acquiring the visible elements of my life, relationship, wedding, social position, has left them vulnerable regarding less visible but ultimately more consequential assets. As I finalize preparation for the first direct confrontation, I review the leverage points not with emotional satisfaction but with strategic clarity. This isn't about vengeance, but appropriate consequences and recovery of what rightfully belongs to me. The wedding they stole cost me $87,000 in direct financial investment. The business they're attempting to appropriate represents 5 years of client relationship development and creative portfolio building. The narrative they've constructed has temporarily damaged my professional and personal standing within our community. Each of these dimensions requires specific, measured response based on the leverage points now clearly identified. Not to punish, but to correct. Not to destroy, but to reclaim. Not to retaliate, but to restore appropriate boundaries and consequences. They believed the wedding ceremony represented their victory and my defeat. They're about to discover it was merely the necessary catalyst for what comes next. 3 weeks after the wedding, I move from assessment to implementation, transforming identified leverage points into strategic position. My temporary hotel residence has been replaced by a small but elegant apartment secured through a 6-month lease paid from my personal emergency fund. This independent space represents more than physical separation. It establishes operational headquarters for the systematic response now unfolding. The legal position crystallizes during my second meeting with Eleanor Winters, who reviews the comprehensive documentation I've compiled with professional approval. Your meticulous record-keeping provides unusual advantages, she observes. Most clients in similar situations rely primarily on emotional testimony rather than substantiating evidence. We prioritize action categories, beginning with financial protection and proceeding through business asset security, wedding investment recovery, and personal property reclamation. Each category receives specific legal approaches: protective injunctions for business accounts, demand letters for wedding expenses, property recovery filings for personal items including the engagement ring. The timing sequence matters, Eleanor advises. Each action should establish position for subsequent steps rather than creating vulnerability through premature escalation. I appreciate her strategic approach, which aligns with my own methodical planning. The legal framework now established, I proceed to financial separation measures beyond the initial protective transfers. The business accounts require particular attention. Working with the forensic accountant recommended by Eleanor, I document the full financial history of Horizon Creative, creating clear delineation between my contributions and those of my former partner. The resulting analysis provides irrefutable evidence of both my majority role in business development and the recent fund misappropriation preceding their wedding. This establishes clear legal grounds for business partnership dissolution with appropriate compensation, the accountant confirms. The unauthorized transfers create additional leverage regarding division terms. Professional boundary setting requires more nuanced implementation. Rather than dramatic company departure announcements, I establish independent communication channels with key clients, ensuring project continuity while legally documenting my continuing role in creative development. We're implementing organizational adjustments to ensure uninterrupted service. I explain to each client contact, maintaining professional language while establishing my continued ownership of their project relationships. The responses confirm the leverage assessment. Clients overwhelmingly prioritize their relationship with me over company structure considerations. The Reynolds Group makes this explicit, requesting direct contract reassignment to me personally regardless of Horizon's operational status. Communication management represents perhaps the most strategically crucial element of my position establishment. I create precisely crafted communication templates for different recipient categories: clients, vendors, mutual friends, and industry associates. Each template provides factual information without emotional embellishment, focusing on financial and professional dimensions rather than personal betrayal aspects. The wedding element reclamation proceeds systematically through vendor communications. I contact each service provider with documentation of my financial contributions, requesting either appropriate service credit or financial accounting. The responses reveal an unexpected advantage. Many vendors express professional discomfort with the situation, having proceeded based on misleading assurances from David and Sarah. "We were told you had willingly stepped aside," the caterer explains. "Had we understood the actual circumstances, we would have required formal transfer documentation rather than verbal assurances." This professional discomfort creates additional leverage beyond contractual obligations. 3 key vendors offer service credits applicable to future events, a gesture of professional goodwill that transforms financial loss into forward-facing assets. Support network activation proceeds with strategic selectivity. Rather than broad emotional appeals, I identify specific individuals whose support provides tactical advantages: my mother's financial expertise, Rebecca's social circle connections, Javier's industry influence. Each receives appropriate information and specific support requests aligned with their capabilities. My mother reviews the financial documentation, identifying additional leverage points I hadn't initially recognized. The tax implications of their financial maneuvers create significant vulnerability, she notes, particularly regarding business expense categorizations from the past quarter. Evidence organization transitions from collection to strategic arrangement. Working with Eleanor, I create presentation packages tailored to specific purposes: legal proceedings, business dissolution negotiations, client reassurance communications, and social circle clarifications. Each package contains precisely selected documentation supporting specific narrative elements without overwhelming recipients with excessive detail. The timing calculation represents the final strategic position element. I establish a carefully sequenced implementation timeline, identifying optimal moments for each action based on maximum leverage opportunity. The wedding vendor communications commence immediately, creating financial pressure through simultaneous demand letters rather than sequential requests easily dismissed individually. The business dissolution proceedings initiate next week, strategically timed to coincide with the major client contract renewal period when business continuity concerns provide maximum leverage. The engagement ring recovery filing follows thereafter, sequenced to arrive after they've returned from their honeymoon, but before family gathering occasions where Sarah would typically showcase her acquired prize. Each sequence element interlocks with subsequent actions, creating cumulative pressure rather than isolated challenges easily addressed individually. As I review the completed strategic position, I recognize how fundamentally different my approach is from what Sarah and David anticipated. They expected emotional collapse, dramatic confrontations, and isolated recovery attempts easily managed through their united narrative control. Instead, they faced systematic, multi-dimensional response implemented through professional channels and documented evidence rather than emotional appeals. Their wedding represented not their final victory, but merely the necessary provocation for appropriate consequence implementation. The event they orchestrated to showcase my replacement has instead catalyzed my strategic response. The communication from Sarah arrives exactly as anticipated, a carefully worded business email suggesting a meeting to discuss my future role at Horizon Creative. The timing confirms they've completed their honeymoon and now seek to finalize my professional sidelining to match my personal replacement. I respond with measured professionalism. I'm available Tuesday at 2 p.m. to discuss partnership obligations and financial reconciliation requirements. Legal counsel will attend to ensure appropriate documentation of agreements reached. The strategic position now fully established, I prepare for the first direct confrontation, not with emotional indignation, but with comprehensive documentation and legal representation. Not seeking revenge, but appropriate consequence and recovery of what rightfully belongs to me. The person who stood frozen in the back of that church watching her wedding stolen has been replaced by someone Sarah and David failed to anticipate. A strategist rather than a victim, implementing consequences rather than suffering defeat. The conference room at Eleanor Winter's law office provides the perfect neutral territory for the first direct confrontation. The polished oak table, strategically arranged document portfolios, and presence of both legal counsel and financial representatives establish professional formality rather than emotional battleground. Sarah and David arrive 7 minutes late. A calculated attempt at power positioning immediately undermined by the scene awaiting them. Their faces register visible surprise at the formal setting and professional representatives, having clearly anticipated a personal conversation easily controlled through emotional manipulation. Catherine, Sarah begins, her practiced sympathetic expression already in place. This seems unnecessarily formal for a friendly business discussion. This isn't a friendly discussion, I reply evenly. This is a legal proceeding regarding business partnership dissolution, wedding expense recovery, and personal property return. David's expression shifts from confident control to uncertainty. We were hoping to discuss your continued role at Horizon in a constructive way. My continued role will be determined through appropriate business valuation and partnership dissolution terms, I respond, gesturing to the documentation Eleanor now distributes. These materials outline the initial terms for consideration. The document portfolio contains 3 separate sections: business valuation analysis documenting my 78% client acquisition contribution, wedding expense accounting detailing $87,000 in personal financial contributions, and personal property inventory, including the family emerald engagement ring currently in Sarah's possession. Sarah attempts to maintain control, her smile tightening as she scans the documents. This seems unnecessarily adversarial, Catherine. We've always valued your contributions. Valued them enough to appropriate them without compensation, Eleanor interjects smoothly. The documentation clearly establishes financial obligations requiring immediate attention. The meeting proceeds with methodical precision. Each element receives specific attention, beginning with the business partnership dissolution terms. The forensic accountant presents unassailable evidence of both my majority contribution to company development and the recent unauthorized fund transfers to accounts established in their names only. This constitutes not merely partnership breach, but potential conversion of business assets, Eleanor explains, her professional tone eliminating emotional framing. The appropriate remedy includes immediate fund restoration and business valuation compensation. David attempts objection, claiming shared development responsibility and equal ownership rights. The documentation immediately contradicts his assertions. Client acquisition records, revenue generation analysis, and portfolio development attribution clearly establish disproportionate contribution patterns. The business structure moving forward can proceed through 2 potential paths, I explain, maintaining professional composure. Either appropriate buyout based on accurate valuation or client relationship reassignment based on origin attribution. The Reynolds Group letter confirming their preference for maintaining their relationship with me personally rather than Horizon Creative creates visible alarm in both their expressions. The recognition that clients might follow relationship patterns rather than company structure clearly hadn't entered their calculations. The wedding expense recovery discussion provokes more emotional response. Sarah's practiced composure slips as Eleanor methodically outlines the financial contributions I made to the ceremony they repurposed. These were gifts to the event, David claims. Once given, the donor doesn't maintain control over utilization. Wedding contributions do not constitute unconditional gifts, Eleanor counters smoothly. They represent conditional investments in a specific event involving specific parties. The alteration of fundamental participant identity invalidates the conditional premise. The vendor statements supporting this interpretation, many expressing professional discomfort with the unusual situation, further strengthen the position. The recovery terms outlined include either financial reimbursement or service credit transfer, with specific timelines for resolution. The personal property recovery section generates the most visible discomfort, particularly regarding the engagement ring. Sarah instinctively covers her left hand where my grandmother's emerald now sits. This was a gift, she states firmly. Legally, engagement rings are unconditional presents. This particular item combines inherited property with conditional presentation elements, Eleanor explains, presenting the jewelry attorney's assessment. The family emerald remains inherited property temporarily incorporated into engagement symbolism. The setting modifications do not transfer underlying ownership of the original gemstone. Throughout the meeting, I maintain complete composure, no emotional appeals, no accusations beyond documented fact presentation, no revenge-seeking language. The professional approach clearly unsettles them more than emotional confrontation would have, providing no opportunity for dismissing my position as merely reactive bitterness. The meeting concludes with clear next steps outlined. Business account restoration within 48 hours, engagement ring return within 1 week, and wedding expense reconciliation plan submission within 10 business days. Each timeline includes specific consequences for noncompliance, including escalation to formal legal proceedings if necessary. This seems extremely aggressive given the circumstances, David attempts as they prepare to leave. We were hoping to maintain positive relationships moving forward. The terms reflect appropriate response to the circumstances you created, I reply simply. The documentation establishes both factual timeline and financial reality without requiring interpretation. As they exit, Sarah attempts one final emotional leverage play, her voice dropping to intimate frequency. I never wanted to hurt you, Catherine. Sometimes hearts just lead us where they need to go. This isn't about hearts, Sarah, I respond, maintaining even tone. It's about contracts, financial obligations, and professional ethics. The documentation addresses those dimensions without requiring emotional justification. When the door closes behind them, Eleanor nods with professional approval. Perfectly handled. Their expectation of emotional confrontation left them unprepared for documented evidence and legal positioning. The implementation continues through systematic vendor notifications. Rather than dramatic revelations, I provide each wedding service provider with appropriate documentation establishing my financial contribution and requesting service credit transfer or financial accounting. The responses confirm the leverage assessment. Many express professional discomfort with how the situation was presented to them. We proceeded based on assurances that you had approved all changes, the venue coordinator explains. Had we understood the actual circumstances, different arrangements would have been required. The controlled information released to key social connections proceeds with similar strategic care. Rather than broadcast accusations, I respond only when directly asked, providing factual documentation rather than emotional narrative. Rebecca serves as particularly effective information channel, her genuine shock at the documented timeline creating natural distribution through our social circle. The dates don't match their story at all, she observes, reviewing the communication evidence. They were planning this while you were still actively engaged in wedding preparations. The professional circle management requires more nuanced approach. I attend the monthly Design Association meeting with composed professionalism, providing Javier with appropriate documentation regarding business structure changes without public disruption. His subsequent introduction of me as independent consultant for the upcoming Reynolds project creates natural industry recognition without requiring explicit explanation throughout implementation. I maintain strict composure despite provocative developments. Sarah's social media posts suggesting difficult transitions and healing past relationship complications receive no direct response. David's attempts to characterize the legal proceedings as unnecessary aggression from someone unable to move forward similarly meet professional rather than emotional reaction. BY maintaining this composed approach while systematically implementing financial, legal, and professional consequences, the first move establishes clear pattern recognition. This isn't emotional retaliation but appropriate, documented response to deliberate actions carrying natural consequences, the initial response. Confirms effective positioning. Within 72 hours, the business account funds have been restored following bank investigation. Within 5 days, 3 wedding vendors have issued service credits transferable to future events. Within 1 week, mutual friends begin questioning timeline inconsistencies in their carefully constructed narrative. The foundation has been established for what comes next, not through vindictive pursuit, but through strategic implementation of appropriate consequences for actions they mistakenly believed would carry no meaningful cost. The Industry Association Gala arrives exactly 4 weeks after my strategic response implementation began. The annual event, highlighting outstanding regional design work, represents significant professional networking opportunity rather than social battlefield. My attendance serves business development purposes regardless of potential confrontation. I select attire with strategic consideration. A midnight blue gown projecting professional confidence rather than either festive celebration or wounded victimhood. Hair styled in elegant simplicity, makeup understated but impeccable, jewelry minimal but significant. The visual impression conveys composed strength rather than emotional fragility. Sarah and David clearly don't anticipate my presence. Their faces register momentary shock when I enter the ballroom, followed by rapid recovery into practiced social performance. They stand near the bar, Sarah's hand conspicuously displaying my grandmother's emerald despite the formal return demand issued through legal channels, rather than acknowledging them immediately. I proceed to the Reynolds group table where I've been specifically requested. Thomas Reynolds rises to greet me, making introductions to visiting executives attending specifically to discuss the upcoming project. The prestigious assignment Javier recommended me for individually rather than through Horizon Creative. "We're delighted you'll be handling this personally," Thomas says, pointedly loud enough to carry to nearby tables. "Your previous work for us has always exceeded expectations." The professional endorsement establishes immediate positioning within the room, recognition of my individual value separate from the company David and Sarah now believe they control. The timing proves perfect as several industry colleagues witness both the endorsement and the visible reaction it produces in my former partners observing from across the room. Throughout the reception portion, I maintain composed professionalism. Engaging genuinely with colleagues, discussing upcoming projects with potential clients, participating appropriately in industry conversations. The natural contrast between this composed presence and the clearly uncomfortable monitoring from Sarah and David creates subtle but noticeable tension in the room. The confrontation, when it inevitably occurs, happens at precisely the worst moment for them, immediately following the Design Awards presentation where the Reynolds project receives specific mention with my name attached as lead consultant rather than Horizon Creative as previously anticipated. Sarah approaches as I accept. Congratulations from colleagues, her smile fixed, but eyes betraying calculation. "Catherine, what a surprise seeing you here. I was hoping we might have opportunity to speak about resolving our situation more amicably." Our situation is proceeding through appropriate channels, I reply evenly. The legal correspondence outlines necessary resolution steps. That seems unnecessarily formal between friends, she attempts, voice pitched for observers' benefit. We should be able to work through misunderstandings directly. The documentation establishes factual timeline rather than misunderstanding, I respond, maintaining professional tone despite her clear attempt to reframe established facts. The financial records and communication evidence support clear interpretation without requiring personal discussion. Her expression tightens slightly, recognition dawning that the anticipated emotional confrontation won't materialize. You're making this more difficult than necessary. David and I never intended to hurt you. Intent isn't relevant to contractual obligation or financial responsibility, I note. The legal proceedings address documented actions rather than emotional motivation. Before she can respond, Thomas Reynolds approaches with two board members from the association. Catherine, these gentlemen are particularly interested in your sustainability approach for the downtown project. Would you mind sharing your perspective? The professional interruption creates perfect pivot opportunity, natural conversation transition without dramatic dismissal. Sarah stands awkwardly as legitimate business discussion develops around her, her presence increasingly irrelevant to the professional exchange occurring. The moment crystallizes the fundamental shift occurring. Her attempt to maintain narrative control disrupted by simple professional reality asserting itself. Not through confrontational challenge, but through natural consequence of documented contribution and recognized capability, the wider revelation unfolds organically through observation rather than orchestration. Industry colleagues notice both the Reynolds project announcement designation and Sarah's increasingly uncomfortable attempts to maintain social positioning. Several approach directly to confirm project transition details, creating natural information distribution without requiring my explicit explanation. I hadn't realized you were working independently now, notes Caroline from the architectural firm that frequently partners with Horizon Creative. Is that recent development? The transition is proceeding through appropriate channels, I confirm without elaboration. The client relationships continue uninterrupted through the structural adjustments. The professional language provides factual information without emotional framing, allowing observers to draw their own conclusions based on visible evidence rather than competing narratives. David's recognition of the shifting dynamic becomes apparent when he attempts intervention, approaching our conversation circle with practiced confidence increasingly undermined by situational reality. I hope everyone's enjoying the event, he begins, hand possessively placed on Sarah's waist. Catherine, we should discuss the Reynolds project transition to ensure smooth handover from your preliminary involvement. The presumption receives immediate correction from Thomas himself. Actually, we've contracted with Catherine directly for full project implementation. Horizon's involvement concluded with the initial concept phase. The public clarification creates visible impact, not through deliberate humiliation, but through simple factual correction of misrepresentation. The professional consequence of their actions manifests without requiring my direct intervention. As the evening progresses, the social recalibration continues through natural observation rather than orchestrated revelation. Colleagues note Sarah's increasingly defensive posture when professional capabilities are discussed. Friends observe David's discomfort when financial aspects of upcoming projects arise in conversation. The composed professionalism I maintain throughout contrasts naturally with their escalating tension. The critical moment arrives when the emerald ring becomes explicit conversation focus. Caroline notices it during dessert service, commenting casually, "Wasn't that your grandmother's stone originally, Catherine? I remember you mentioning the family history when you first got engaged." Before I can respond with appropriate discretion, Sarah interjects with forced brightness. "David had it reset for me. It suits my coloring better anyway." The tactless comment creates immediate discomfort among those familiar with the actual circumstances. Thomas's wife Jennifer, who had admired the original engagement design, looks between us with dawning comprehension. I was under the impression family heirlooms typically returned to the original family when engagements ended, she observes with deliberate precision. Appropriate return arrangements have been formally requested through legal channels. I confirm without emotional elaboration. This simple factual statement creates far more powerful impact than emotional accusation could have achieved. The documented process, now visible to social observers, transforms what might have been dismissed as emotional grievance into recognized professional and ethical obligation. By evening's end, the narrative control Sarah and David believed they maintained has visibly eroded. Not through dramatic confrontation, but through natural consequence of documented reality becoming gradually apparent to neutral observers. Their carefully constructed explanation increasingly contradicted by timeline evidence, financial documentation, and professional realignment visible throughout the event. As I prepare to depart, Thomas delivers the final crystallizing observation, not to me, but within clear hearing of several colleagues, including David himself, remarkable composure throughout a clearly challenging situation. That level of professional integrity speaks volumes about character. The simple acknowledgement confirms the transformation now occurring. Not through vindictive pursuit, but through dignified adherence to factual reality and appropriate consequence implementation. The revelation unfolds not because I orchestrated dramatic exposure, but because truth naturally emerges when artificial narratives lose their supporting structures. The social reckoning has begun without requiring my emotional investment or vindictive orchestration. Simply by maintaining composed professionalism while systematically implementing appropriate consequences, the reality they attempted to obscure becomes increasingly visible to the community they hoped would validate their reconstructed narrative. The wedding they stole becomes, with perfect irony, the catalyst for revelations they never anticipated and consequences they clearly failed to calculate. The consequences emerge gradually, like a carefully choreographed performance. Each revelation builds upon the last, transforming the narrative Sarah and David believed they had control over. Professional repercussions materialize first. The Reynolds Group project, previously their potential triumph, becomes my most significant professional validation. Thomas Reynolds not only confirms my full project leadership, but begins recommending me for additional high-profile design opportunities. Horizon Creative begins to unravel. The client relationships they assumed were secure start migrating, recognizing that their success was built more on my professional network than their individual capabilities. Two major clients formally request project reassignment directly to me, bypassing the company structure entirely. Sarah's professional standing proves equally fragile. Her attempts to position herself as a design partner alongside David reveal fundamental weaknesses. The design community, initially neutral, begins to recognize the calculated nature of their relationship's origin. The financial fallout becomes more pronounced. The wedding expenses, once a symbol of their stolen future, transform into a legal liability. Vendor after vendor confirms my original financial contributions, creating a paper trail of potential legal consequences. David's family dynamics shift unexpectedly. His sister Megan becomes an unexpected source of information, providing insights into the growing family tension surrounding their actions. The carefully constructed narrative of romantic inevitability begins to crack under familial scrutiny. The emerald ring becomes a symbolic battleground. My legal demand for its return gains unexpected social traction. What Sarah believed was a trophy of conquest becomes a public marker of ethical breach. Social circles realign naturally. Friends who initially offered congratulatory responses begin asking more pointed questions. The timeline inconsistencies become increasingly difficult to ignore. The dates don't make sense, Rebecca observes during our coffee meeting. It's like they were planning this for months before they claimed feelings developed. The professional association's subtle actions speak loudest. Javier's recommendation of my independent consulting status creates more damage than any direct confrontation could have achieved. By the time the full picture emerges, the transformation is complete. Not through my active destruction of their narrative, but through their own carefully constructed lies collapsing under factual scrutiny, they thought stealing my wedding was their victory. Instead, it became the catalyst for their most comprehensive defeat. The consequences emerge gradually, like a carefully choreographed performance. Each revelation builds upon the last, transforming the narrative Sarah and David believed they had control over. Professional repercussions materialize first. The Reynolds Group project, previously their potential triumph, becomes my most significant professional validation. Thomas Reynolds not only confirms my full project leadership, but begins recommending me for additional high-profile design opportunities. Horizon Creative begins to unravel. The client relationships they assumed were secure start migrating, recognizing that their success was built more on my professional network than their individual capabilities. Two major clients formally request project reassignment directly to me, bypassing the company structure entirely. Sarah's professional standing proves equally fragile. Her attempts to position herself as a design partner alongside David reveal fundamental weaknesses. The design community, initially neutral, begins to recognize the calculated nature of their relationship's origin. The financial fallout becomes more pronounced. The wedding expenses, once a symbol of their stolen future, transform into a legal liability. Vendor after vendor confirms my original financial contributions, creating a paper trail of potential legal consequences. David's family dynamics shift unexpectedly. His sister Megan becomes an unexpected source of information, providing insights into the growing family tension surrounding their actions. The carefully constructed narrative of romantic inevitability begins to crack under familial scrutiny. The emerald ring becomes a symbolic battleground. My legal demand for its return gains unexpected social traction. What Sarah believed was a trophy of conquest becomes a public marker of ethical breach. Social circles realign naturally. Friends who initially offered congratulatory responses begin asking more pointed questions. The timeline inconsistencies become increasingly difficult to ignore. The dates don't make sense, Rebecca observes during our coffee meeting. It's like they were planning this for months before they claimed feelings developed. The professional association's subtle actions speak loudest. Javier's recommendation of my independent consulting status creates more damage than any direct confrontation could have achieved. By the time the full picture emerges, the transformation is complete. Not through my active destruction of their narrative, but through their own carefully constructed lies collapsing under factual scrutiny, they thought stealing my wedding was their victory. Instead, it became the catalyst for their most comprehensive defeat. 1 year passes. The transformation becomes profound and irreversible. Independent design consultancy flourishes beyond Horizon Creative's previous limitations. The Reynolds Group project becomes a landmark achievement, opening doors to opportunities I'd never imagined possible during my previous partnership. David and Sarah fade into professional irrelevance. Their attempts to maintain the narrative of romantic destiny crumble against the weight of documented evidence and professional consequences. The emerald ring returns, not through legal battle, but through a quiet acknowledgement of its true ownership. Sarah's attempt to retain it becomes another symbol of her fundamental misunderstanding of valued. Why mother's observation proves prophetic. Sometimes losing everything is how you discover your true strength, she says during our monthly dinner. The business I rebuild isn't just a replacement for what was stolen. It's a completely new creation, built on my terms, without compromise. Thomas Reynolds becomes more than a client, a professional mentor who recognizes the strategic intelligence behind my response. Most would have collapsed, he tells me during our annual project review. You transformed betrayal into opportunity. Sarah attempts reconciliation 6 months after the initial exposure. A carefully worded email suggesting we could move past recent events receives no response. David's attempts prove equally futile. A mutual friend reports he's struggling professionally, the client network he assumed was secure having largely migrated to my consultancy. The wedding they stole becomes a distant memory, not a wound, but a catalyst for something far more significant. I am not defined by their betrayal. I am defined by my response. They thought they were writing my story. I was always the author.